Hello, my name's Nancy Snedden and I'm a moderator for today's webinar on using digital tools to enrich your learners' vocabulary. You can't see me, I'm just on audio, but you will be able to see our presenters today. That's David Brightwell and Tom Booth in a couple of minutes. So while we're waiting for everyone to join us, and if you haven't done already, if you just want to type hello, good morning or good afternoon, good evening even, depending on where you are, into the chat box on the screen and we can see who's joining us. And we've already got nearly 400 people in the room, which is fantastic. I think we've got a few more waiting to join though. So if you just want to say hello, and then we know that you're with us. So while everybody's doing that, I'll just go through a couple of points to help you get the most out of today's webinar. To get good quality sound, if you do have headphones, we recommend you put them on. You'll get much clearer quality audio with headphones. And to get a really good quality picture on the webinar, it does help if you can switch off anything that you don't need on your computer, any extra programs that you've got running, things like Skype, for example. The webinar is live streamed. It takes up quite a lot of bandwidth. So your internet connection will be struggling if you've got lots of things going on your computer. So switch off anything you don't need, and that will help with the quality of the picture. If you can't see or you can't hear very well and that continues, you can always try to reconnect, and the reconnect button is at the bottom of your screen. You can also try to refresh the browser just by clicking on the refresh icon at the top of your screen if that doesn't work. One more thing for you to check is that you have access to YouTube. That's really important. The webinar is streamed using YouTube, so make sure it's enabled on your computer or you're allowed to use it where you are joining the webinar from. Okay, so we've got how many people? Just over 400, which is great. That's welcome to all of you. While we're waiting for some more people to join, I'll just recap those points very briefly so that you can all make the most out of today's webinar. So my name is Nancy Snedden. I'm a moderator for today's webinar, so I'm just on audio, you can't see me. I'm here to introduce the webinar and show you how to use some of the tools on Webinar Jam. In a couple of moments, I'm going to hand over to our presenters today. That's David Brightwell and Tom Booth, and they're going to talk to us about using digital tools to enrich your learners' vocabulary. So for people who've just joined us, to make sure you get really good quality audio, if you do have headphones, we recommend that you put them on. And to get good quality video on the webinar, if you can switch off any extra programs that you've got running on your computer, anything you don't need, switch it off, and that should help to get good quality image on the video and good quality picture. The webinar is live streamed. It takes up quite a lot of bandwidth, so that your internet connection doesn't struggle too much. Switch off anything that you don't need. If you've got problems with audio or video, you can always try to reconnect, and the reconnect button is at the bottom of your screen. If that doesn't work, you can also just refresh the browser. So click on the refresh icon at the top of your screen. Right, it's almost 2 o'clock UK time now, so I'm going to officially welcome you to today's webinar on using digital tools to enrich your learners' vocabulary. My name's Nancy Snedden. I'm a moderator today, so I'm just on audio. You can't see me. I'm going to introduce the webinar, show you how to use some of the tools on Webinar Jam, and then I'll hand over to David Brightwell and Tom Booth, who are going to talk to you about using digital tools to enrich your learners' vocabulary. I'd also like to let you know that the webinar is recorded, so towards the end of the week, we'll send you a link to a recording of the webinar. You'll be able to watch everything again. You'll get the slides, the video, the audio. So if you have if you missed a little bit today, for example, or if there's something that you want to review, don't worry, you'll be able to do that in your own time. When we send you a link to the recording of the webinar. Okay, so during the webinar, you will need to be able to use the chat box, and I can see you're all doing that beautifully already. You're all already saying hello, good afternoon, good morning. You're saying where you're from as well. So that's great. So the chat box is there if you want to type in any comments or if you've got any questions. If it's a question we can answer straight away, we'll type an answer to you in the chat box. But we will keep some of your questions for a question and answer session at the end of the webinar. So don't worry if we don't answer your question straight away. We'll also ask you to use the chat box for some activities. So we might ask you to type in the answer to a question or an idea about something, for example, in the chat box. The presenters will tell you when they want you to do that. Another type of activity that we will do is like a poll, a multiple choice activity. So when we do that, you'll see a question on the screen. There'll be several different options, say the letters A, B, C, D, things like that. You'll have to choose one of them, to click on one of them, and they'll appear on the right-hand side of your screen under your chat box. So let's practice that now. And what we're going to do is just find out a little bit about you before I hand over to David and Tom. So we'd like to know who you are. Under your chat box, in a second or two, you will see the letters A, B, C and D. So if you are a teacher, click on A. If you are a coordinator or director of studies, click on B. If you're a learner, click on C. And if you're a parent, click on D. Now, I can see lots and lots and lots of you are typing your responses into the chat box. If you could use the poll instead, if you could click on the letter rather than type in the chat box, then we'll get a much clearer representation of who you all are. So don't type in the chat box, click on the letter in the poll instead. And I can see the results are pretty stable now. It looks like we've got 93% of you are teachers, about 7% are coordinators, directors of studies, and 2% learners as well, which is really interesting. Thank you very much. That's useful to know. One more thing we'd like to know is where you are joining the webinar from. So we've looked into the registration numbers and we've created this word cloud to show which countries we think you come from. So we think that our top 5 countries are Italy, Russia, Argentina, Romania, Spain. But we'd just like to check that we've got that right. So if you just type in the chat box where you are from, if you tell us where you're from, we've got people from Portugal, Italy, Australia. Wow, must be late at night there. Argentina, Mexico, Ecuador, Switzerland, Russia, Netherlands, Bosnia, all over the place. And you're typing in so fast, I can barely read your responses. But it looks like we've got people from all over the world. Welcome to all of you. Thank you. Okay, well, that's all from me for now. We're going to start the webinar now. So I'm going to hand over to your presenters for today. That's David Brightwell and Tom Booth. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, everyone. I'm David Brightwell, and I'm a teacher trainer and writer on teaching and learning English.
And I'm Tom Booth, and I work on digital learning products at Cambridge English.
Welcome to today's webinar. It's good to be here with you. The topic of today's webinar is digital tools and how they can best be used to help you enrich your learners' vocabulary. So, here are some questions that we hope to address during today's webinar. We're going to start by defining vocabulary and talking about what learners need to know about it.
Then we'll look at what vocabulary learners need to know at different levels and how this relates to the different exams which Cambridge English Language Assessment offers. Then we'll focus on some digital tools that we think can help learners to focus on vocabulary and ways in which they can use the tools to personalise and memorise new words.
We'll also look at how digital tools can be used to encourage learners to work together on learning new words and to extend vocabulary learning to take place outside the classroom. And finally, we'll give you some tips and ideas about how to get started with digital tools.
We're aiming to encourage you to use digital tools. And if you've never used them before, we hope to give you some ideas about activities you can easily show your learners, particularly when focusing on vocabulary learning and development. We'll be asking you to take part in some polls and answer some questions as well. So let's get started.
So first of all, let's look at the title, Using Digital Tools to Enrich Your Learners' Vocabulary. What do we mean exactly by vocabulary? Well, at its simplest, vocabulary just means words. And of course, your learners need to learn as many individual words and expressions as quickly as possible in order to make themselves understood and to understand what they read or hear.
So now let's ask a slightly different question. What do learners actually need to know about vocabulary? What information do they need about the words they want to learn?
So, what do you think learners need to know about vocabulary? Please share your ideas in the chat box. Here's the question again. What do you think learners need to know about vocabulary?
Lots of answers coming through already.
Yeah, we have lots of answers.
Arnab saying part of speech.
The form of the vocabulary, the meaning, the use, pronunciation, collocations, context. Lots of really good answers.
Can't even keep up. There's so many answers.
Lots of really good answers
about
what learners need to know. So you've mentioned ideas related to pronunciation, form, meaning, collocation. Thanks for all of your answers.
Here are 6 general areas that we think learners need to be aware of and to think about. Although at lower levels, not all of them might be so important. Firstly, what it means, the meaning. Then, how to say it, the pronunciation, and how to spell it, the spelling. The form of the word is also very important. When we talk about form with reference to vocabulary, this means what type of word it is, for example, a noun or a verb. Form can also include aspects such as irregular plurals or countable and uncountable nouns. And also potential issues like verbs and dependent prepositions such as listen to and depend on.
Another consideration is how the word is used, its usage. If words are often used together, for example, a tough question, we call this collocation. There may also be questions about the formality of a vocabulary item. For example, the verbs inquire and ask about have different levels of formality, or even whether it has negative or positive connotations. For example, tabloid newspapers. And finally, we can think about the frequency of a word, how common it is, and what level it should be learnt at.
At different levels, learners need to learn different types of vocabulary. But how do we know what vocabulary is appropriate at each level? If your learners are preparing themselves for Cambridge English exams, you can look on the Resources for Teachers section of the Cambridge English website and find word lists for some of them.
Let's have a look at one of these word lists as an example. Here is the word list for Cambridge English Preliminary and Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools. These are Cambridge English General English exams for adult and teenage learners at B1 level. We'll send you a link to this after the webinar.
The list is organised both alphabetically and according to topic. So if we look at first at the alphabetical list, we can see that there are about 200 words under A, while under Z there are just 4: zebra, zero, zone, and zoo. These are the words recommended for a learner preparing for Cambridge English Preliminary or Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools. And they are the words candidates are expected to understand and may have to know to answer a question in the exam. But the list is not a complete list of every word which might appear somewhere in the exam. And of course, learners should not limit themselves to only learning these words.
The same words are also arranged by topic. So, for example, if we take the topic of the natural world, we see that the word list has about 50 words which the learners need to know. 3 of those words beginning with A, and there's one of those Z words again, zebra. It's also worth noting that many exam course books also base their vocabulary input on these word lists.
We'd now like to ask you a question. Have you ever used a word list to prepare learners for an exam? Please answer by voting yes or no now. Have you ever used a word list to prepare learners for an exam? Lots of answers coming in. A mixture of yeses and nos, actually.
It's about 50%. About half of the participants say yes, and about half say no.
Yeah. Yes is creeping up to 58% now. So excellent. So do remember, the word list is a really useful starting point, and it's well worth finding it on the Cambridge English website.
There are word lists for all of the Cambridge English exams at levels up to and including B1, including Cambridge English Business Preliminary, as well as the general English exams for adults and schools, and all the exams for young learners, Cambridge English Starters, Movers, and Flyers. The information about which words are necessary at which levels comes from corpus evidence, which Cambridge English Language Assessment collects and updates. This information relates to how often each word is used in real life. The higher the frequency a word is, the lower the level at which it might be tested in an exam.
Now, let's get you involved again. You can see 10 words. They're all words to do with learning or studying vocabulary. 7 of them are from the Cambridge English Starters word list, and 3 of them aren't. Don't forget, the Cambridge English Starters list is lower than A1, so the words on that list are really very basic words which learners at a very low level need to know.
Have a look and pick out the 3 words that aren't at Cambridge English Starters level. Type these words into the chat box. Here's the question again. Which 3 words would not be found on the Cambridge English Starters word list? Word, memory, repetition, understand, tell, write, definition, read, teacher, talk. We've got quite a few answers coming in. Most people are picking out the 3 words definition, repetition, and
Memory.
memory. Yeah. Most people are picking out those 3 words: repetition,
Absolutely.
definition, and memory.
Yes, well done. You correctly spotted that these 3 words are not on the Cambridge English Starters list. But how can you find out what level they are?
Well, there are several options to find out the level of a word, but let's start by looking at this free online resource, English Vocabulary Profile.
This is a great resource, created in 2012 and based on research into vocabulary learning, which provides information about the words and phrases that are typically mastered by learners at 6 levels of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, the CEFR. It is a valuable tool for decision-making around what vocabulary to teach students as they progress at different levels, and also how to assess them at different levels.
You can create a free account easily to sign in to this resource. If you already have an account, open up the homepage and look up the word repetition. What level is it? Type your answer now. If you don't have an account, just guess what level you think the word repetition is and type that in the chat box now. What level is the word repetition?
Any ideas? Some people are guessing.
Some people are guessing B1, B2, C1.
Interesting.
Interesting answers.
In fact, repetition is actually at level C2. That's the level of Cambridge English proficiency. Of course, the verb repeat, meaning to say something again, that comes in at a much lower level. That's A2, in fact. Also, don't forget that this is a guide based on a corpus of learners' use of vocabulary. And it doesn't mean that learners would never come across this word at a lower level. So, English Vocabulary Profile is one way to find out about the level of words. Another online resource that can help you is an online dictionary, such as the Cambridge Dictionary.
This contains information about word level 2. You don't need to sign up for this one. You can just start using it right away. So let's have a go at using it. Let's look for the word memory. It's important to have a good memory if you want to enrich your vocabulary.
The word memory is interesting because it has more than one meaning. Firstly, it means the ability to remember. For example, I have a good memory, so I can learn words quickly. But it also has another related meaning, which is slightly different. It also means something which you remember from the past. For example, looking at old photos can bring back a lot of memories. As you can see from the dictionary page, both these meanings of the word are at B1 level.
But there is another meaning of the word, the memory of a computer. For example, my computer was expensive because it has a big memory. This meaning of the word, as you can see, is at A2, which means that learners usually know this meaning before the other meanings, which is noteworthy because this obviously was not the original meaning of the word. This demonstrates how it's worth using a dictionary to check exactly what level a word is at.
Now, let's remind ourselves of what learners need to know about a word. Let's look at the slide we saw earlier to remind you. An online dictionary can help learners with all of these aspects of vocabulary, in fact. Firstly, learners have the pronunciation, both British and American versions. The computer will play an audio recording of the pronunciation when you click on the speaker symbol.
Then there are some common collocations, a good memory, a loss of memory, to bring back memories, and so on. And there are also some common idioms which include the word memory. For example, take a stroll, trip, or walk down memory lane. In addition, learners can also read more examples of each meaning of the word and open the thesaurus function, which gives them synonyms and other related words.
Now, let's get some more feedback from you about online dictionaries. What do you find most useful about online dictionaries? Just write a few words in the chat box. What do you find most useful about online dictionaries?
We have some answers coming through.
Easy, quick.
It's easy to use them. They're quick.
Immediacy.
They're immediate. The speed is good. They're very good for the pronunciation.
Absolutely.
Quick. Yeah, lots and lots of really good ideas coming through.
So, as teachers, you can use an online dictionary to prepare for your lessons or to help you analyse vocabulary in order to prepare for questions you may be asked by your students in class, and also to check whether the vocabulary is at the right level for your class or not. You can also prepare pre-reading or pre-listening activities with vocabulary at suitable levels, especially checking words in English Vocabulary Profile so that you can decide if words in a text need to be learned just for recognition or also for production.
Teachers and learners can also use an online dictionary in lessons to encourage learners to use them outside class too. You can show the page on an interactive whiteboard or as a slide on a projector screen so that the whole class can see the relevant information and or hear the pronunciation of a word or phrase.
Learners can also use an online dictionary independently in class, on their phones or tablets, in carefully structured tasks. So not, for example, for looking up every word when they're reading something, but rather, for example, as a vocabulary extension task for quick finishers. For example, they could be asked to look up 5 words and make flashcards or quiz questions to test their partner. And also, learners could have a vocabulary list and 5 minutes to learn and remember as many words as possible before doing a team game like noughts and crosses or blockbusters on the whiteboard.
So, using online dictionaries is one way of helping learners focus on vocabulary. But there are other digital tools that can also be very useful, and we're going to look at another one now. This is a digital tool called Quizlet. Let's see how learners can use it to help them remember vocabulary. Quizlet is a well-known digital tool. It's been around for about 10 years, and it's popular with different kinds of learners. There are lots of other great digital tools out there too, but this one is probably a good place to start if you're new to digital tools.
Now, have a look at this set of words. They're really low-level words, and all of them are from the Cambridge English Starters word list. We'll look at using some other digital tools for learning higher-level vocabulary later, but let's focus on this for now. Here we have 10 words, all names of colours. Not difficult? Well, let's think about what might be difficult about these words. So, let's go back to our checklist. Meaning, pronunciation, spelling, form, usage and frequency. Well, regarding meaning, this is pretty straightforward. There may be differences in how individuals describe or perceive colours, but overall we can imagine that most learners will understand the meanings of these words by showing them a picture of the colour. But let's think about pronunciation and spelling.
Here are the words in our set again. Have a look at them. This is an example of a simple set of words about one topic. We're going to be using these words with Quizlet. Okay, let's think about spelling. Which word do you think is going to present the most problems with spelling for your learners? Type the word in the box below. Which word do you think is going to present the most problems for your learners for their spelling? Type your answer in the chat box. Got some answers coming through now. Most people are picking out the word purple.
There's a few yellows, aren't there? But purple seems to be the winner so far.
Why do you think purple should be difficult to spell?
I wonder if it's the sound. Perhaps there's a lot of different ways that can be spelled in English.
There's a lot of ways of spelling you are in purple is not the only one. That's right. So that could be one of the reasons why it's difficult.
Do you think it might depend on the learner's first language?
I think a lot will depend on the learner's first language, yes. Yes.
So, once they're confident with the meaning, pronunciation and spelling, a great way to get learners actively learning this vocabulary is to use flashcards. There are plenty of digital flashcard tools available. You can search for one in your browser or your app store, but we're going to look at Quizlet to see how we can help learners with the 10 words on our list. First of all, the teacher will need a Quizlet account. To sign up for it, you just need to provide an email address and a password. Then search for a vocabulary set called YLE Starters-Colours. YLE Starters Colours. This set has been produced by Cambridge English Language Assessment. The words and visuals are from the Cambridge English Starters word list. When you've found it, you have a choice of activities which learners can do to help them practice the words. And the most basic activity is the flashcards. You do need to remember that when searching for content, you should be careful of the source, check the content thoroughly, and ensure that if learners are searching, they know what to do if they see anything inappropriate or upsetting. For example, cover or turn off the screen immediately, or if they're in class, ask the teacher for assistance. You can give the learners the exact URL of your trusted set to avoid these kinds of issues. These flashcards are a digital version of old-fashioned paper flashcards, where you have the word on one side and the meaning on the other. On these digital flashcards, you have an audio element too. If you click the audio button, the computer produces the sound of the word, so this helps the learner with the pronunciation, as they can hear the word or phrase.
Digital flashcard tools usually have a range of things you can do to practice. For example, here in Quizlet, you can do an activity called Learn, where the learner sees a picture of the word, then has to type in the word itself. And another option is a spelling activity. Here, the computer produces the audio of the word, the learner types the word, and if the spelling is incorrect, the computer highlights the error in red, then requires the learner to correct the spelling themselves. So these three activities all help the learner with the meaning, spelling, and pronunciation of the words.
Digital flashcard tools often have games that you can use to practice the words and phrases in a set. Here in Quizlet, you can see that there are several other activities which the learner can also use to work on this kind of vocabulary. There is a matching game, where they match cards as quickly as possible, and there's a kind of video arcade game, where learners have to type the words quickly to stop their planet being destroyed.
At the moment, we've only looked at using a flashcard tool such as Quizlet on a computer to practice this kind of vocabulary in class. But digital flashcard tools often provide a mobile app too, and here you can see the Quizlet mobile app, so learners can access it via a smartphone or tablet. The same set of vocabulary and most of the same activities are available for them to practice that way too. So, we've seen how this kind of digital flashcard tool can be used to present and practice vocabulary at higher levels. Let's move on now to talk about how digital tools can help learners to personalize and memorize words.
Let's start by defining what we mean. Here, by personalize, we mean make the vocabulary relevant and personal to the learner by helping them to create their own connection to it. This in turn helps to make the vocabulary more memorable to the learner, which in turn makes it easier for the learner to memorize it.
As you know, there's a big difference between a learner's passive vocabulary, which is the total set of words they can recognize and understand, and their active vocabulary, which is the set of words they can use effectively in speaking and writing. While there is always going to be a gap between these two, by memorizing more and more vocabulary, the learner begins to be able to use more and more of it, and gradually their active vocabulary grows. So, how can digital tools help learners personalize and memorize vocabulary? Well, in terms of personalization, the most obvious way that learners can help themselves is by providing translations of words instead of definitions in English.
Another way, avoiding the use of translation, is to create a personalized definition or choose a picture that has some relevance for the individual, or provide an example of the word in a context that is meaningful to the individual learner.
So, using a digital flashcard tool, it's easy enough to make cards using these translations or personalized definitions instead. As you can see here, the learner can just take the original set of words and change the definitions originally provided to something more personal to them. In this example, the student has thought of a personal context for the word clueless.
As an alternative, the teacher can provide the list of words without any definitions and allow the learner to find their own way to remember the meaning which suits them best. It's easy to do, and then the student has their own digital reference for this vocabulary. Alternatively, the student can find pictures which mean something to them personally and make a set of cards using these pictures for definitions. Okay, so let's look at what we can do with digital tools to help learners memorize vocabulary.
This great digital tool is called Memrise, and it focuses, as the name might suggest, on memorization. It uses a really well-researched technique called spaced repetition. The idea is that in order to memorize something, you need to keep being exposed to it over and over again at increasing intervals. Memrise uses this idea and allows learners to practice the vocabulary over and over again on their mobile devices.
Let's have a look at how you can get started with Memrise. Again, like many digital tools, you have to create an account. So you'll need an email address and a password. In a minute, we'll show you how you can create your own word sets. But let's start by showing you how Memrise works with a set we've already made.
Let's look at a Memrise set. We're going to use a set of words about travel and transport. All the words in the set are taken from the Cambridge English Preliminary and Cambridge English Preliminary for Schools word list, which we saw earlier in this webinar. Here are the words in the set. Have a look at them. They're all to do with travel and transport. Think about how you would write short definitions of these words.
We've turned this set of words into a set on Memrise to share with B1 learners. If you were doing this vocabulary with your class, you could share this set either by social media or by creating a Memrise study group and sharing it with them in that way. Once we've shared the vocabulary set with our learners, they can start using the Memrise tool to begin to memorise it. Again, they can do this using the computer, but Memrise really works best once students begin to access the vocabulary activities via their smartphones.
What makes this tool really effective is that it allows learners to set themselves daily goals. It also sends the user reminders to practice more, and it remembers which vocabulary items the learner is finding the most difficult and includes those items in reviewing sessions. There are also audio prompts to help with pronunciation and games activities too, to make the learning more memorable and fun. All this helps the learner to memorize the new vocabulary much more quickly. As I mentioned earlier with Quizlet, it's important here too to check the content thoroughly and ensure that if learners are searching, they know to notify you immediately if they see anything inappropriate or upsetting, and to turn off the screen straight away. Learners must be 13 or over to have their own account with Memrise.
In these slides, you can see some of the activities being used on a smartphone. So, we've seen how you can use Memrise to practice a vocabulary set which has already been created on the digital tool. But it's also possible, and this is where you may be able to use this tool to best effect with your learners, to create your own course.
Let's see how that works. Last time we just looked at a small set of words, but this time we'll create a larger set. Instead of a small set of words on a topic, let's imagine that you have a larger set of words, for example, the vocabulary list from one unit of a course book you are using. Most course books list the vocabulary in each unit at the back of the book or on the book's website. Some books even supply the word list as a spreadsheet which you can download. Check on your course book's website to see if your book does that.
So, we click Create a Course, then we give the course a name. We're calling this course Unit 1, as we're going to be using the vocabulary from Unit 1 of our course book. And then we'll put that it's an English course for English speakers. We could change this to make it an English course for speakers of a particular language, which might be better for you if you're teaching monolingual classes. We'll come back to why you might want to do that in a moment.
Now we have to start adding the words. We could do this by manually adding them one at a time. We can invite the students to do this too by clicking on Contributors. We can invite other students to edit the word list, but remember that they have to be 13 or over to do that. We can also see other definitions and translations for this word, which have been taken from other courses on Memrise where this word appears. So that is why the safety aspect is important when doing this. It's even possible, and this is where you might be able to provide the learners with plenty of extra practice with the vocabulary in their course book, to import large sets of vocabulary from spreadsheets or databases. This can be really useful if you're using a course book which has a word list available as a spreadsheet. It's easy to copy and paste the words and the definitions from the spreadsheet into the Memrise course. Click Advanced and then Bulk Add and then follow the instructions. This is a quick way to make a vocabulary course from the word list of the whole book. Many course books now have an accompanying word list spreadsheet like this, making it really very easy to turn the course vocabulary into a Memrise course. With some course books, it's also possible to download the same word list with particular language translations of the list. So instead of English translations of the words, we can download, for example, French translations instead, and then we can use these translations in the Memrise activity instead of definitions in English. Many course books provide definitions in other languages, including Russian, German, and so on.
Let's move on now to talk about the benefits of collaborating in vocabulary learning. Well, you probably agree that it's motivating for students and it helps create better working relationships in the classroom. It can also make learning quicker, as it encourages learners to teach one another, and it takes some of the pressure away from the teacher. All in all, as we all know, encouraging cooperation and collaboration between learners is really useful. So, how about using digital tools to help learners collaborate?
Well, as we've already seen, there are lots of opportunities for getting learners to share the vocabulary sets they've made in digital tools such as Quizlet or Memrise. And most other digital tools encourage sharing resources too. The teacher can encourage the students to share their materials with one another by creating study groups within the digital tool or using social media links to get students to share their materials with each other. There are also lots of other really useful digital tools designed to aid collaborative learning.
There are many digital tools available which can help us to create interactive activities for learners and provide opportunities for collaboration between learners. Let's look at an example called WordWall.
This is a great tool, which is very easy to use. Again, the teacher just needs an email address and password to sign up. Once the teacher has signed up, it's easy to make fun activities which can encourage cooperation between students in the classroom. In this activity, the teacher has produced an online quiz to practice the students' knowledge of adjectives describing feelings. The teacher puts the picture and 6 options on the smartboard. Then, using a code presented to the learners via the smartboard, the learners use their smartphones to log into the quiz. The learners work in groups to race one another to answer the questions in the quiz.
These kinds of activities are available in many digital tools and can make for really fun, collaborative classroom activities, which are great for getting students working together.
But digital tools are also great for getting students working together outside the classroom too. Let's look at another well-established digital tool called Padlet. This is one of a series of different tools that can be used for creating shared online workboards. Padlet is really easy to use. You don't even need to sign up, though you will get more features if you do. But let's just show you the basics without signing up. So we go to padlet.com and click on For School and then Make a Padlet. And this brings up a workspace, like a whiteboard. You need to give it a name. We're going to use it to work on vocabulary about environmental problems. So we're calling this Padlet Environmental Problems. Now you need to share this board space with your learners. This is where the collaboration comes in. There are many ways to share the space. You can share it via an email or social media link, or even just get the students to scan the QR code from their tablets or smartphones. This gives all the students access to read and write on the board space. They can do it in class or outside the classroom. It's like all the students writing on one wall all at the same time. Now you can use the shared space to work on collaborating on vocabulary. For example, in this activity, you can create a Padlet space and ask each student in the class to identify one environmental issue in their country and post a picture of it on the board. This is a kind of group brainstorming session where the students are all providing information and putting it on the board. Collaborative activities like this can allow teachers to encourage students to work together and can make the group learning experience much more enjoyable. So, using digital tools inside or outside the classroom, what are the issues? And how can digital tools help to build a bridge between the learning of vocabulary inside and outside the classroom? Here's a general framework for how you can combine in-class and out-of-class activities using digital tools. For example, using an activity like the last one we've just looked at, using Padlet.
Step 1. The teacher introduces the topic, in this case, environmental problems. Step 2. In the class, the teacher shows the learners how to post to the Padlet page and makes sure they're familiar with how to use the digital tool and any safety features they should know about. Step 3. The students are asked to do some work using the digital tool out of the classroom. In this case, finding photos about environmental problems and researching vocabulary related to the topic.
Step 4. Students are asked to collaborate out of class by posting to the Padlet wall and commenting on other learners' posts in their free time as a homework task. Step 5. The teacher gives feedback on the activity in class. Step 6. The teacher saves the Padlet, which becomes a useful resource for future lessons and recycling.
So, hopefully, we've given you some ideas about digital tools for vocabulary learning. But how can you get started with digital tools, and how can you know if they're really working?
Well, getting started may take a little bit of courage if you haven't used any tools like this before. But if you keep it very simple to start with, you are unlikely to make mistakes. Don't try anything too difficult, and make sure that you have practiced using the tool yourself a few times before you use it with the learners. It's important that you learn how to support your teaching through technology, but that you don't allow the technology to dominate too much. A lesson which relies entirely on technology may seem too impersonal and may not appeal to all students' learning styles. Don't try to use technology in more than 1/4 of the time that you spend in class.
Digital tools are commercial products. They're all available to use for free. However, some of them may charge a subscription to access all of their features or functions. You may choose to subscribe if you find one tool very useful, but don't pay for subscriptions you won't use. We advise you to try using the free content first and only move up to a paid subscription if you're sure you're going to use it. And we wouldn't advise that you ask students to sign up for anything they'll have to pay for, although many learners may make their own decision to pay for a premium service with one or more of the digital tools. You can reduce the amount of time you spend preparing for materials to use with your learners by getting them to make the materials themselves. Once you've trained your learners how to use particular digital tools for learning vocabulary, you can encourage the students to make their own digital vocabulary sets and share them with one another.
All teachers who have ever used technology in class have experienced some problems with it. Even if your classroom is really well resourced, you may find that some technical problems may have an impact on your lesson. A particular problem with activities or tools which use the students' smartphones is the problem of access to the internet in the classroom. If students connect to the internet via a mobile network, it may be slow or expensive.
On the other hand, using the school Wi-Fi may also present problems, as too many students in one room trying to access it at the same time may overload it. Also, many of the digital tools you may find for vocabulary learning may have different functionality online and offline, and may only work fully when students are connected to the internet. And don't forget that students may not always have good access to the internet outside the classroom. So be aware of whether an activity you set requires internet access and how you can adapt an activity if necessary.
Get feedback from the students. Ask them if they find the tools useful. Find out how and when they are using them. Most digital tools will also allow you to easily track how often they're being used. Make sure that you are providing learners with the assistance they need. Ask your students which digital tools they like best and see how you can help them to use them. There are lots of options and opportunities out there, just waiting to be discovered. Good luck getting started with digital tools for teaching and learning vocabulary. We've now come to the end of the main webinar, and in a moment we will answer any further questions you may have about today's session. Please type your questions into the chat box. Before that, Nancy is going to show you how to find some additional resources to support you and your learners.
Thank you very much, David and Tom. That was a really interesting webinar. This is Nancy again. I'm just on audio, so you can't see me. And while I'm talking, David and Tom are going to look through the questions that you've already sent in, and we've got a few waiting for them to answer. But I expect there will be some more that you would like to ask. So if you haven't already sent in a question, just type it in the chat box now, and they'll have a look at it. While you're doing that, I'll just remind you that you will get an email towards the end of the week, which will contain a link to a recording of this webinar. So if you've had any problems with connection, or if you had to leave early and you've missed a little bit, don't worry, you'll be able to get the whole lot again in your own time. You'll get the slides, the video, the audio, the whole lot. So you'll be able to watch it again later if you want to. You'll also get a certificate of attendance, and you'll get a feedback form. Okay, I'm just going to talk through some more materials and resources which you and your learners might find useful. So first of all, we've got Cambridge Dictionary. This is used by nearly 20 million people around the world each month, and that includes learners, teachers and native speakers. So it's really popular. It's also free, which is great, and it's easy to use from all devices, including tablets and mobiles. You can personalize it, so you can create your own word lists and quizzes. You can also view the interface in your native language, and you can interact with other users on Facebook and Twitter. You'll get new words added to the dictionary on a regular basis. There's also a blog which includes topical articles, and there's always a word of the day, which is quite interesting to see as well. So there's lots and lots to look at on Cambridge Dictionary. The next resource we've got for you is called Word Fun World, and this is for learners preparing for the Cambridge English Young Learners tests. That's starters, movers and flyers. And on this site there are games to practice and learn key vocabulary. And there are lots of different features, again, like a picture, dictionary, hearing words as you play games, matching pictures to words and playing against the clock. So again, lots to look at on this site. And the next resource is the Digital Teacher. This is a free professional development website, which is for helping language teachers develop their digital skills. On this site, you can find out about the Cambridge English Digital Framework. And this has been developed in consultation with practicing language teachers and trainers, and it describes key competencies for teaching effectively with technology. The framework has got 6 categories in it, so you can start off by testing yourself to identify which level you're at, and then you can decide how you'd like to develop your digital skills. There's bite-sized training on this site, lots of practical tips. There are ready-to-use lesson plans, reviews of digital products, and blogs as well by experts and other teachers about using technology in the classroom. So again, lots to look at on this site when you've got time to explore it. And the next resource for you is Teaching English, another really useful website. It's on the Cambridge English website, and on this page you can find free resources for teachers, information about teaching qualifications, information about the Cambridge English Teaching Framework, and more webinars. And you can also sign up for a newsletter, so you'll receive updates and articles. Okay, that's it from me. I'm going to hand you back now to David and Tom, who will answer some of your questions. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Nancy. Let's now answer questions that have been suggested by some of you. David, could you take the first one?
Thank you. Yes, we've had lots and lots of very interesting questions. We won't get time to answer them all because we've got so many, but just going to pick out a few really interesting questions that we can look at and answer. Kayleen has asked whether or not we've got many lists in Quizlet of already loaded vocabulary for each level of the Cambridge tests. No, we haven't, but you can go onto Quizlet quite easily and create your own list. Cambridge English doesn't provide lots and lots of resources already preloaded onto the digital tools, but it's very easy to put them on there. We have one question: can these apps work without internet connection? Most of the digital tools do work to some extent without an internet connection, but most of them, you don't get the full functionality unless you're online. It's really important when you start with a tool to work out what you're going to be doing with it when you're online and what you're going to expect the students to be able to do with it offline, because most of them rely to some extent on an internet connection to do everything. So yes and no is the answer to that question. Here's a really key question. Using digital tools in class is great, but how do you keep your students off social media? Well, how do you stop your students using the things that you don't want them to use on the internet in the classroom? You really have to negotiate with your students and explain to them that you're using these things as a learning tool with a positive value in class, and to get them agree to not use their devices for other purposes. Otherwise, you will find that they're very easily distracted. And we've got one more question that's useful. WordWall, is it an app? No, it's a website that can be used to create activities in the classroom, but it's not an app which students are using by themselves on their devices. And Tom's going to take some more questions.
Okay, thank you. I've got a question here from Kayleen, who's asking about learners who tend to rely really heavily on translation dictionaries and how you can try to discourage that, which I think is really interesting. I had the same experience when I was teaching as well, because we often try to tell students that you need to not try to understand every single word in a text, for example. You need to try to make connections between English words and the meanings without having to always resort to translation each time. And we try to tell students that it's worthwhile in the long term if you can try to avoid just translating each word with your dictionary. But actually for students, that's in the short term, that's the quickest way. If you see a word you don't know, it's very tempting to just look it up very quickly. That's the shortest and quickest way around it. So I think the best advice I can give is just show students different ways that they can remember vocabulary. So show students creative ways of using their vocabulary notebook. And that includes digital tools as well as old-fashioned paper and pen notebooks. If you show students more different ways of using it, and maybe if you try to gently encourage them rather than forcing them. So maybe you might do an activity where there's an initial reading stage where you ban dictionaries and ask them to only do things a certain way, and then later they can go back and do it their way if they like. That might be one way of gently encouraging them to try to look at vocabulary more creatively rather than just translating each individual word. I've got a question from Miriam, who's asking about how we can help students relate the pronunciation of a word to its spelling. And that's really interesting, especially in the case of the English language, which is different from some languages in that the spelling and the pronunciation don't always correspond to each other. In fact, the majority of English words do correspond to patterns. Most English words, the spelling is predictable, and there are patterns you can find, and it's really helpful to teach students the patterns of spelling. But unfortunately, the tricky thing is that a lot of the words which don't follow the rules are the most common words. Words like number 2, TWO. There's lots of very common words which don't follow the rules. So I think it's a combination of different approaches. And also I think it's important when you're presenting vocabulary to make sure you vary the way you present it. So rather than always presenting vocabulary through a text, if you make sure you present vocabulary through listening activities and speaking activities as well, that can help learners to get used to the sound as well as the visual form of a word, I think. I guess it's probably that's very obvious, but hopefully it's useful advice. I had another comment I was going to reply to here. Someone's asking about how to make word clouds. And I've forgotten the name of the place. I've done it before once, but if you just Google make word clouds, I've done it before once, and there's lots of websites where you can just type words into a box and it makes a word cloud for you. It's quite straightforward to do.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think that's all we have time for. Thank you very much for attending today. We hope that you found it useful, and we look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. The next webinar coming up is on using digital tools to improve your writing, and that's on the 8th and 10th of May. Thank you.